Hello, friends, and welcome to episode 15 of the Stained Glass Podcast. I am your host, Jessica Spurlock. On today's episode, we'll do a deeper dive into a topic introduced in the premiere episode just for your encouragement. Let's get started. In the premiere episode of the Stained Glass Podcast, I outlined a 5-step process for creating stained glass artwork and how it relates to how God uses the broken pieces of our stories to reveal His glory. These steps include planning, breaking, aligning, strengthening, and polishing. I have dedicated entire episodes to take a deep dive into each of these stages. Episode 5 centered on the planning step. Episode 8 focused on the breaking step. And Episode 12 explored the aligning step. In this episode, we'll take an in-depth look at the strengthening step. In the strengthening step, putty is packed into the areas with the lead strip to protect it from the weather and stabilizes the window. Now, lead tracks are usually wider than the glass thickness to work with all kinds of glass, but it is flimsy and loose until the putty is packed in to make it solid and stronger. Let me ask you a question. Do you think that God doesn't love you when your prayers go unanswered? I'll let you ponder that for a second. Okay, here's the answer. God's love is not based on your circumstances. Some pain in this life will seem unbearable. Some circumstances will seem unjust. Some questions will remain unanswered. We should ask, where is God in the midst of this? Now, I can assure you that God is not idle. He is working out everything according to His will, for your ultimate good and for His glory. Now, when the painful circumstances come, we are tempted to doubt God. We forget who it is who dwells within us and what He is capable of doing through us. Do not allow your circumstances to lessen your obedience or cause you to call God's promises into question. Suffering will either make us run to God or away from Him. In the midst of trials, ask God, is this trial making me more bitter or more gentle? God is aware of the suffering of His people and takes note of the harm done to them. His response to their afflictions varies. Sometimes He intervenes to dramatically bring deliverance, while at other times He strengthens them to persevere. Either way, one thing remains constant. We can always rely on God's care when we suffer for Christ's sake. It may be tempting to view suffering as bad luck, but every sorrow and grief that Jesus experienced was unjust. As His followers, we're called to be willing to suffer as He did. It is essential to remember that whatever suffering God has called us to endure is worth it because Jesus is worthy. Following Christ doesn't insulate from the storms of life, but we can take comfort in knowing that God's promises anchor us through them. Now, even in the darkest and most dramatic circumstances of life, God still cares for His people and works out His purposes, often using unlikely people in quiet ways to do so. Suffering is an inevitable part of life and plays an essential role in strengthening our faith in Jesus. It is through trials that we learn to put our trust in Jesus as our only hope. Testing develops our staying power and enables us to persevere through life's challenges. Difficulties are not meant to discourage us, but rather to help us measure the growth of our faith as we put His ways into practice. The process of refining gold is a beautiful metaphor for the transformative power of trials. Only after being heated in a fire so hot that all the impurities are burned away can the true beauty of gold be revealed. Similarly, the trials we face in life refine us and make us beautiful, enabling us to shine with the light of Christ. As followers of Christ, we are called to do His will and to live a life that is pleasing to Him. Though we may face suffering and hardship along the way, it is better to endure such trials while doing good than to live a life of ease while doing evil. Through our obedience to God, we have the power to be a blessing to others, helping them to obtain the blessings of their own. Our actions have the potential to make a positive impact on those around us, spreading the love and grace of God to all. The grace of God forms the foundation of our partnership with Him. It's essential to understand that everything we have and what we are, our resources, our gifts, and our talents, are ultimately from Him. This understanding helps us to acknowledge our dependence on God and develop a deeper relationship with Him. Despite our shortcomings, God's mercy and grace never run out. However, in His goodness, He often uses difficult situations to remind us that He is all we need. Through these trials, we learn to rely on Him more fully and trust that He has our best interests at heart. In the midst of trials, remember who God is and how He deals with His people. Acknowledge His hand at work. When God is at work, even hopelessness may be the doorway to fresh starts and new opportunities. God will one day dispel all darkness, and I cannot wait. Remember that Christ triumphed over suffering. Therefore, our suffering is not the end of our story either. Dear Lord, I come to you with a heavy heart, knowing that suffering and trials are an inevitable part of life. But I know that through these difficulties, you have the power to strengthen my faith and to draw me closer to you. Help me to see the beauty in the challenges I face and trust that you are with me every step of the way. Grant me peace and perseverance to endure the hardships that come my way, and the wisdom to see the lessons that you are teaching me through them. May my faith be refined like the gold in the fire, made pure and shining for all to see. Help me to remember that all things work together for good for those who love you and are called according to your purpose. Thank you for your endless mercy and grace, which you sustain through the toughest of times. I pray that I may continue to grow in my faith and that you will use my struggles to be a light for others who are also facing difficulties. Amen. As I stated in the start of this episode of the Stained Glass Podcast, there are 5 steps to making stained glass. They are planning, breaking, aligning, strengthening, and finally polishing. In this step, we took a deeper dive into the strengthening step. In a future episode, we'll dive into the final step. If you're listening to me during the month of July of 2023, I am running a contest. You can win a $25 gift card to Starbucks. Now, I don't know about you, but I could always use a Starbucks run to pick me up through the day, especially if I get to go with a friend. So, if you would like to enter, all I need for you to do is to write a review of the Stained Glass Podcast on your podcast platform and screenshot that review, and then share that post on Instagram, tagging me at the Stained Glass Podcast. You can enter multiple times every time you share this post. Now, positive reviews will legitimize this podcast and will help push this ministry out to others and to spread their encouragement around even further. Now, if you don't know how to post a podcast review, check out some of my latest reels. Again, I am at the Stained Glass Podcast on Instagram and in the Stained Glass Podcast group on Facebook. I'll announce the winner live on Instagram on Monday, July 31st, 2023. And even if you have missed the contest, I would really appreciate a positive rating and a review. In the next episode, I'll be talking with Leigh Mackenzie about how God used a traumatic season in her life to show her the meaning of Psalm 23. It drops in 2 weeks. Until then, this has been Jessica Spurlock with the Stained Glass Podcast. Go be a blessing.